Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Mariam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to learn and grow together? Then let's get started. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to Episode 9 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we travel down under to Australia to visit with genealogist ShaunaHicks. Shauna, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Hi, it's actually really good to be talking to someone in the north rather than down under.
Okay, Shauna, let's get started by having you tell us about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Well, I started my family history in 1977, which is a long time ago, no computers, no internet, and I actually watched the Roots TV miniseries, and that started my passion. And at the time I was in a fairly boring government job, so I decided that I would make genealogy and family history a lifelong career. So I started a program of studies that led me into working in archives and libraries for 35 years. And when I retired in 2009, my business was basically an extension of what I was doing within the government sector. So you could say that my whole life changed watching Roots, and my business just carries on with lecturing and talking and teaching people how to use archives and libraries.
So you work independently now in your own business?
That's right. I set it up in 2009. It's a part-time business. It allows me to travel, combine my interests of travel, personal family history, and my passion for teaching others about archives and libraries.
Before you retired in 2009, did you work part-time doing lecturing and things like that?
Yes, I worked full-time, but I also did a lot of voluntary work for family history and genealogy societies, giving talks and participating in seminars and that sort of thing. And my jobs, various jobs, allowed me to do that in an official capacity as well. So it allowed me to see a lot of Australia and to work in a number of different places within Australia to give me that overall Australian knowledge.
Excellent that you have been able to do it professionally, earning a salary, and then you were able to start your own business after you retired from that. So that's really excellent. You really had a really strong background in family history before opening your own business.
Well, yes, I think that was a big advantage because a lot of people already knew me because I'd worked in reading rooms around Queensland and Victoria. I had participated in genealogy conferences, library conferences, museum conferences, and archive conferences. So I had that huge network of people that I could call on as I was moving into a part-time retirement business.
So when you moved into your own business and you were no longer supported by a company, how did you prepare yourself for that change?
Well, it's hard because all of a sudden you're by yourself. When you're working in a government agency, you know, you have strategic plans, you have regular meetings, you have people you can talk to. When you're at home by yourself, it's quite difficult. So one of the things I did do was set up a social media network, if you like. So I now have a wide network of people online who are quite different from the people not online, if you like. So I have two kinds of worlds that I can tap into. So I'm not really alone at home anymore because of the social media network. I can call on anybody to ask a question, whereas before I'd have to get on the phone and do it. So online networks are just as important as networks in person. And I think it's just a matter of being a little bit disciplined. You know, I write books, so I know there's a deadline. I have to allow myself so much time to meet that deadline so I don't inconvenience the publisher. And so it's discipline, networking, and remembering to have fun, I think.
Were there any skills that you had to learn such as accounting or more the business angle that was taking care of you for you when you worked for the government?
Well, I did pick up a lot of business and accounting type skills as a senior manager because I was in charge of $1 million budgets and things like that. So a lot of that I already had. I think the biggest loss I had was my IT staff. Before, I had a whole lot of IT people, and I would just jump on the phone and say, hey, come and fix something or tell me how to do this. And all of a sudden it was just me, and I'm not that tech savvy, but I would miss my IT people. But again, you build up that contact online. You just Skype somebody or you instant message them, and someone will come back and say, you just need to do this. So again, online contacts have saved me. But if I could have anyone at home with me, it would be an IT person.
What was the hardest part of starting an independent genealogy business?
Making the decision to do it, I think. Having worked in government for 35 years, I was at that stage where did I keep going or do I start to do some of the things I've always wanted to do with my life? So it was one of those life-changing big decisions that you say, okay, I'm going to do something I've always wanted to do, which was writing research guides and just mainly writing, which I couldn't do in a government sphere. You didn't get paid to write. So it was that decision. It was my 35th anniversary in government, and I just thought it all sort of came together. And I just made the decision. I went home, talked to my family, and they said, go for it. And before I knew it, I was retired, looking for a business name, which I actually traded on my name because everybody knew it. And that's why I called my business ShaunaHicks History Enterprises, because everyone knows my name. So it became my identity.
Can you share a story of an obstacle or a challenge that you encountered early in your business and how you worked around it? And it can be any kind of challenge. It doesn't have to be a genealogy challenge. It could be a business challenge, just something you would have had to deal with that you didn't really have to cope with when you were employed.
Well, I think, as I sort of mentioned a bit earlier, it's the self-discipline to get yourself motivated to sit down at the computer or do whatever. You have to sort of say, I'm going to do this today and have a set of tasks. Otherwise, what you find in retirement is that there are so many things that come along. Before you know it, you're having coffee here, lunch there. I haven't quite taken up golf yet, but some of those sort of incidental things were taking up my time, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. Whereas in a work environment, you do have a regimen, you have a daily roster, and you've got meetings and that. The free fall of working at home by myself was a bit hard to get around to start with. So now I have a list of tasks that I would like to do every day, and I tick them off. And then if I get them done before lunchtime, I've got the afternoon off. Or if I know that I've got to do something in the morning, I plan to do something in the afternoon. So it's being regimented and still working in a time frame and a framework. Otherwise, time just runs away. So I find the biggest obstacle is that self-discipline, self-motivation to achieve what you want and not be distracted by other people.
So when you make that to-do list, do you make it in the morning when you start work, or do you make it the previous night?
The previous night. And I mean, some things do take more than a day if I'm writing an article or a book. So I'll chunk it down into particular tasks. I want to finish a chapter or finish an article, or I've got some research to do for someone. So I do have about half a dozen. I try and do the easy ones first, and then I have that longer time period for whatever the big chunk is. If I get all of that done, well, then there's always another to-do list that you can start to tick off. But I do have some key things driven by business deadlines that I try to achieve, and I have a set diary.
Tell us about that moment in your new independent business when everything started to come together and you became really confident of where you were heading.
I think that would probably be when I held my first research guide in my hand. My books, I've just finished the 9th book, are published by Unlock the Past, which is a genealogy company here in Australia. And when they published my first book, and it was their first book as well, because they started up around the same time as me. And when I held that in my hands, I knew that I had finally achieved something that I had always wanted to achieve. And then, of course, when it started selling and I got some royalties, it was even more of a reality because it showed that people wanted to read what I was writing and they were prepared to purchase it. And then, of course, I was also doing some speaking engagements with Unlock the Past, which were venues for selling the books. And as I said, 9 books later, I feel quite confident that my writing skills are quite, well, people like buying my books, let me put it that way.
Okay, so you started writing the books after you retired and started your own independent business.
Yes, it was one of the things I wanted to do. My business is mainly writing, because that was something I always wanted to do, and lecturing. So a lot of my lectures are based on my books, but not all. And the writing and the lecturing and the travel are the main elements of my business. I do some research when as I go around, or people contact me because they want or they know my name. It's a smaller element, the research. It's mainly the writing that I enjoy.
And the books that you're writing, are they geographically focused? So you're writing a research guide for a particular area in Australia, or how are the guides set up?
Most of them are subject-oriented, like things like immigration, mining records, asylum records. I do have one geographic book which is on Victoria, because I spent not quite 10 years in Victoria at the Public Record Office. And so I did a research guide to Victoria. But most of them are subject-based.
And when you started your business, did you make the decision at that point that you would just focus on writing and speaking more than the client research?
Well, I think when I made the decision to set up the business, I set it up to do what I wanted. I wasn't, because I'm a part-time business and it's not a core income driver for me, I can sort of indulge myself a little bit in what I do. So I set the business up to please myself and do the things that I like to do. But at the same time, I'm still doing what I always wanted, which was helping others to do their family history.
Tell us a little bit about the lecturing that you do. Do you specialize in certain topics, or what are you known for when it comes to your lecturing?
I've worked in Queensland, the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, and Victoria. So I have given talks on those. I've worked at the Queensland State Archives, the Public Record Office Victoria, the National Archives of Australia. So I've given lots of talks on those kind of things. I specialise in areas like asylums and prisons and church records. I even do a lot of Google talks. I do Google genealogy tools, and that's popular, online newspapers. One of the things that I do a lot is travelling regional areas in Australia. It's such a big country that a lot of the government agencies only go to capital cities, or they don't have the funds and budget to go out into regional areas. So we travel around and I present talks in places that, find it very difficult to get good speakers. And so I could talk and maybe give 3 or 4 talks in a single day to a group who live, 1,000 odd kilometres from the coast or something. So I like to help those smaller groups.
Tell us what kind of ancestors Australians today are researching. From my point of view, I imagine that Australians are mostly researching British ancestry. But is that accurate? What countries are people researching?
Well, I think the base is probably the UK. Most of us have Irish, Scottish and English ancestry. But there's a huge Scandinavian population here. My own ancestors, my father's family were Norwegian, and so I've traced them. And my great-great-great-grandfather even went to Minnesota in the 1850s. So I have some American connections there as well. But so Scandinavia, Germany, lots of Germans here, a lot of Chinese. Chinese people came out in the 1850s for the gold, and a lot of them stayed and married Irish women in particular. So you have quite a blend of cultures in Australia. People don't expect us to have a lot, but even, say, in the 19th century, we had Afghan cameleers coming over because in outback Queensland we had camels instead of horses. So we needed Afghan cameleers to help us with the camels. So it's quite a multicultural population right from the word go. I don't know how many cultures, but I would go in the hundreds and hundreds, yeah.
And you're our first Australian on the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Can you tell us what organizations genealogists in Australia might belong to? What associations?
Most of them would belong to their local family history society or genealogical group. Here in Queensland, I'm a member of the Queensland Family History Society and the Genealogical Society of Queensland. I still have my membership of the Genealogical Society of Victoria because they have a wonderful online membership program, so it is useful. Some people are members of the Society of Australian Genealogists, which is a Sydney-based, New South Wales-based huge society, probably the biggest in Australia, I would expect. Others are probably members of Royal Historical Societies. There's a lot of good records that can be found in historical society libraries. A lot of us are members of the Association of Professional Genealogists. There's a small and growing group of people in that. My own background, I'm a professional member of the Australian Society of Archivists, and archives and genies go hand in hand because what I've seen over the last 30-odd years is archives trying to make their records much more accessible. So there is a strong bond between archives and genealogists. The Professional Historians Association, of which I'm also a member, that requires university history degrees and that sort of thing. So some genealogists aren't a member of that on a professional basis, but they may still be aligned on an association basis because it's about networking. If you're in these professional bodies and people know who you are, you have so many people that you can contact. So it is really about networking, and that's why, even though I'm retired, I've still kept up a lot of my membership.
So if there's an Australian genealogist who's just really fallen in love with genealogy, they are thinking they want to go professional, they want to open their own business, what would be the best organization for them to join, both from an educational point of view and a networking point of view?
Well, certainly their local society, because most genealogists would specialise in their own geographical area. If they can get to the local state archive or state library where they would do the research for people, that would be the society to join. You really also need to have some qualifications, I think. Sometimes people have a lot of personal experience, but then if you don't have some of the qualifications, you may not be doing things quite as easily as you could. Here in Australia, we have a problem in that we don't have a lot of courses that people can do. The Society of Australian Genealogists in Sydney is the only one that offers a certificate course and a diploma course. I did the diploma course back in the early 90s, and that's really the only course. Some of the universities have a family history component to some of their heritage courses or heritage degrees, but sometimes that can be quite expensive. I do know some of the genealogists here are doing the National Institute of Genealogical Studies online courses, and some also have been doing the Pharos courses, which are in the UK. So the online world has given us more opportunities, but for people who actually want to network, the only time we get together is when every 3 years the Australasian Federation of Family History Organisations has a conference. And so every 3 years, most of us try to get to that conference, and then we have a chat and a talk. I also go to the New South Wales and ACT conferences when I can, and History Queensland often has one every 2 years. And I think Victoria tries to have one every 2 years, but doesn't always work. So we don't, and because it's such a big country, we don't have a lot of opportunities for personal networking outside of our own capital cities, but we try when we can.
Do you know of many Australian genealogists who have traveled either to America or to Europe, either for conferences or education or networking?
I think we've seen an increase over the last couple of years. I know Jill Ball has gone to Roots Tech quite a few times, and I was going to go this year, but I moved from Victoria to Queensland not this year, last year. I moved, and so I couldn't travel because I was unpacking. And a few people have been going over to the Who Do You Think You Are conferences in London. And again, that's one of those things that I'm going to try and do. But this time, both Roots Tech and Who Do You Think You Are coinciding with the Unlock the Past Genealogy cruise, which is leaving in about 3 weeks' time. And we have Chris Patton and Thomas McEntee on that. And I should say the cruises are also a great way to network because they represent some of the best speakers in Australia and New Zealand, plus whoever the overseas guest is. So this year I can't make either of those because because the date conflicts. But next year we've all said we're going to Roots Tech, so you might see us all there in 2015, the Down Under contingent.
That would be great. How do you balance paid work versus volunteering? Do you do any volunteer work?
Yes, I've always done volunteer work for all the societies that I've ever been members of. At the moment, I'm the volunteer coordinator of the National Family History Month in Australia, which is August, and that's for the Australasian Federation of Family History Organisations. They oversee it, and they asked me to take it on last year, and I've agreed to do it again this year. Basically, what we do is try and get some sponsorship to help pay for the website and costs of launching and publicity and that type of thing. And we communicate with all of the societies, the libraries and archives, and try and get them to put their genealogy events up on our web calendar in August. And we try to promote family history to the local public as well as to the members of societies, so that August is turning into a huge family history month here in Australia. And New Zealand has had it as a month for a long time, but in Australia it was only a week until I changed it last year to the month.
What is the most fun project that you've ever worked on? And it could be one of your writing projects. It could be a lecture, whatever. What was the most fun?
I'd have to say that back in the late 70s and early 80s, we in Brisbane were doing a lot of cemetery picnics. We went out and we transcribed all of the huge Brisbane cemeteries. There's quite a few of them. And we used to spend weekends, in the heat in summer, freezing cold in winter. There'd be snakes and mosquitoes and strange people wandering around in the cemeteries. But we used to transcribe the tombstones. We then went home and typed them up using carbon paper, because it was pre-computer days. And then we used to index them on 5x3 cards and then file them. And that whole project went on for years and years and years. But it was a team of people that we used to see on a regular basis. We had a lot of fun. We took our lunch and our coffees, and it was a great way to create a resource that is hugely valuable today. And I think a lot of people just starting out have missed out on some of those projects because we've done all the hard work and had the fun. Now they just call it up online and probably don't appreciate what went behind it. But I think the cemetery picnics were fun. These days, I'd have to say the most fun I have is on the genealogy cruises. And I'm just about to do the 4th cruise. And I just think they're a whole lot of fun from day one to the end of the cruise.
For the cemeteries in Brisbane that you were transcribing, typically how old were they? How far back did they go? 1800?
Well, Brisbane was only established in 1824, and that first cemetery no longer exists. So probably the ones we were going back to about the 1850s or something like that, right through to the present day. So Australia, in a way, is a very young country because it was only settled by Europeans in 1788. And Queensland, as I say, didn't really get into the picture until the 1820s. Some of the other states were later. So we have quite a young history, if you like.
Thank you. That gives me a better idea of the history that you're dealing with. Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hello, this is Kimberly Powell, President-elect of the Association of Professional Genealogists. APG is an international membership organization dedicated to supporting all individuals in the business of genealogy, whether you're an archivist, librarian, educator, writer, or researcher. Our 2,600 members include genealogists at all stages of their professional careers, from those just starting out to some of the field's most renowned leaders. Learn how to grow your business and network with other professionals through our educational webinars, informal mentoring groups, active discussion lists, the APG Quarterly, and our annual Professional Management Conference. Visit us online at apgen.org to learn how we can help you on your professional journey and how you can help us advance public awareness and understanding of the profession of genealogy.
Okay, Shauna, we are going to enter the lightning round, and I'm going to bombard you with a bunch of questions, and you're going to come back with some great answers for all the genealogists across Australia and the world who are listening. Are you ready?
I hope so. Is there a prize?
Well, the prize is getting through it.
Okay.
What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
That no one would read my books.
And you got over that quickly after the first book, right?
I did indeed. And I'm really pleased that people like to come along to my talks and that, because it's great seeing audiences, and I love getting the questions at the end. I think that's what makes it all worthwhile.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Probably just do it. Go for it. You don't know if you're going to be successful. You just have to do it, and you do your best, and usually it's not as bad as you think.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
I would buy a good book that, assuming it's been written, of course, that gives you a base knowledge of what it is that you hope to build your business on. For example, here in Australia, while we have a number of overall family history books, there's only one that's sort of current that gives you the whole of Australia, beginning your family history, and that's published by the Heraldry and Genealogical Society of Canberra. Their book is sort of like the base book that most societies sell if someone's starting out in family history. So it's a where-to book that you can go to, and I think you need that one base book that gives you broad knowledge. And then once you start to specialise, then you can build up your library. But I still am very much a book person. I mean, there may be some websites and things like that I could recommend, but I think a book, and especially one that is kept current, like Hagsoft keeps its book current, can be a good standby.
Do you have an internet productivity tool like Evernote or Dropbox that you love and can share with the audience?
I do have Evernote, and I also have Dropbox. I probably don't use them as often or as effectively as I could. In the upcoming cruise, I've got myself scheduled to attend some sessions on how to use those products more effectively. Jill Ball's one of the people on the cruise, and I know she's very tech savvy. So I go along to her sessions. She's even going to convince me to Google Hangout on the cruise. So that's another one of my new tech things that I've got to do. So, yeah.
What is your preferred social media channel?
I like Twitter because it's quite instant and you can get a lot of up-to-date information quite quickly. I do use Facebook and Google+, but I find that sometimes I get a little lost in them. I'm not tech savvy enough to keep track of everything that I think I should be keeping track of. So I keep certain people's profiles and I check theirs, and then that leads me back to things that I might have missed. But certainly between Twitter, Facebook and Google+, I try to keep across a number of the blogs that are happening in Australia and New Zealand.
Now, you said that you were going to do a Google Hangout with Jill Ball. Have you ever done a Google Hangout before?
No, she keeps inviting me, and because I have some difficulties in hearing, I couldn't quite hear with headphones. So I bought myself some new technology, which I'm trialling with you today, and I think it's been reasonably successful. And it allows the laptop to talk directly into my hearing aid. And so I'm hopeful, now that we've done this interview via Skype, that I'll be able to get back to Jill and say, count me in on the next Hangout.
That's excellent. That's really cool. If you can recommend one book for our listeners, and it's got to be different than that other one you mentioned, what would it be?
One book?
It could be a writing book, it could be a business book, it could be a lecturing book, or whatever your favorite genealogy book is.
It could even be my own. I wrote Family History on the Cheap because that was a lot of my talks are based around doing family history by yourself and as cheaply as possible. So my third book was Family History on the Cheap, and it's probably been my biggest seller, and I'm due to do another edition, I think, because it's a couple of years old now. But there's a lot of great sites out there that people can use, get their basics, and then when they get stuck, then they can seek professional help and get themselves key research done, but they've already covered their own basics. So Family History on the Cheap is one that I've done, and it's probably my biggest seller here in Australia. I'm just trying to have a look around my bookshelf. I'd have to say The Professional Genealogist is up on my bookshelf, so I don't think anybody should be thinking about doing professional genealogy without a copy of that one either.
Our audience can't see us, but Shauna and I are actually doing video Skype right now, and I can actually see Professional Genealogy on her bookshelf.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
It's the gray one with the red letters on the side.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Yep.
It's next to the complete atlas of the Great Britain. And you need a good atlas too.
Mm-hmm. All right, Shauna, give our audience one parting piece of advice and tell us how we can get in contact with you.
Oh, one piece of advice. Well, as I said earlier, just do it, but don't do it in isolation. Get yourself a network. Get known. Talk to people at conferences, seminars, whatever. Get known through a social media profile. Comment on people's blogs. Do your own blog. Just interact with people. Build up that community of contacts, and then people can get in touch with you if they need someone in your particular area. Certainly join an association like the Association of Professional Genealogists, because it's all about contacts and networking. And, of course, my own website is, Google it under Shauna Hicks, but it's www.shaunahicks.com.au. And I'm also the author of Diary of an Australian Genealogist, which is on Blogger, so you can Google that one as well.
And your Twitter username is at Hicks Shauna?
Hicks Shauna, because Shauna Hicks was already taken.
Okay. And I will have links to all of these in the show notes for Shauna's episode. So people can just go right to the genealogyprofessional.com and find the links to everything there. Shauna, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been really great. Thank you.
Well, that was really fun getting to know Shauna Hicks of Australia and learning about what it's like to be a genealogy professional in Australia. It seems like things are very different there, and obviously they have different organizations and different educational opportunities and different concerns and timeframes when they're doing genealogical research. So it's really interesting to learn how things are done in Australia and other parts of the world, and that's one of the fun parts, for me at least, of doing this podcast. Now, each week I've got to give you an action item because that makes it a lot more fun. And one of the things that Shauna mentioned several times, right from the start and right at the end, she talked about networking and working in isolation. And she said that was one of the hardest things when she started working on her own was the discipline of, getting things done when she was working in isolation and the lack of people around her, the lack of support because she no longer had workmates, colleagues in the same office. So that is one of the big issues that we all struggle with as independent genealogists, the whole concept of working alone and working in isolation. So this week's action item is a fun one. What I want you to do is to identify some people who are on social media that you can interact with. Now, if you don't have an account on Facebook or Twitter or Google+, then you're going to need to get an account. You're going to have to jump into social media. That might be kind of scary for some of you. Okay, you can get around that if you really, really don't like social media. You can still fulfill this action item by committing to face-to-face meetings with other genealogists, like on a weekly basis. So if you have enough genealogists around you that you can get together for coffee, that will qualify and I'll let you off the hook for social media. But because so many of us are very far flung, it can be really challenging. And sometimes we just don't have the time to drive the distance that it takes to meet other people. Facebook can really take the place of that. And most of the people so far have mentioned Facebook as their favorite water cooler location, their place to meet other genealogists and talk about things and get support. So if you don't have a Facebook account already, get one and identify some people in your network who are already on Facebook. You can choose Twitter or Google+ if you prefer, and connect to them and start establishing your online network, so that you won't be working in isolation anymore. And if you have questions, then you can post them on Facebook and see what kind of response you get. So hopefully you'll consider this a more fun action item this week. It is still going to do wonders to help you in your business goal of furthering your genealogy business, whether you've started yet or not. But it will help you start to build that community and will reduce that sense of being alone all the time. So have fun with that. Until next week, so long.